justice is not always so easy to discern. Genesis gives us a much more complex picture. In Genesis 34, for instance, a clear act of violence and injustice has been committed against Abraham's great-great-granddaughter, Dinah. Her brothers Simon and Levi take it upon themselves to avenge this great injustice. They do this by destroying an entire town for the sin of one man. Afterward, Jacob, their father, looks at this justice and is horrified. He says, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land." And at the end of Jacob's life, Jacob blesses all of his sons except Simon and Levi. There, Jacob says, "Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel."
Do you ever just have so much to say you don't know where to start? Because that's how I feel after I watched this clip. And I wanted to understand the context more, like why is he even talking about this story? And sure enough, it comes from a longer video that is all about God's justice in the Old Testament. That's why this is crazy on like 3 different levels. The hypocrisy here is truly baffling, that someone can just say these things and think they're making a point when they are shooting themselves in the foot for the very nature of this God. But he put the short together, he decided to have it out there, and so insofar as I can see what he's trying to accomplish, I want to speak to that. I could be wrong, tell me if you get a different interpretation here, but it seems to me that he is sharing this story, especially in the context of the larger video, that God's justice can be hard to understand, but that here we get a really clear case of right and wrong. Because when the great-granddaughter of Abraham is raped, that's clearly wrong. But also, and this is where we get into a lot of like prescriptive versus descriptive. When we read the Old Testament, we are seeing that the sons of Jacob are doing something also wrong because they punished an entire city for the sin of one man. Again, that's the hypocrisy I'm talking about, but we're going to get to that. And he ends the video by saying that Jacob is horrified and that he curses his sons, as if that is supposed to be showing us that, yes, this evil does not stand. So God takes no part in this. He is completely absent from this story, but I don't see it in that framing. And so I want to share with you the full account of the Genesis 34 story here about Dinah. Because instead of taking the great man of God, Jacob who becomes Israel, patriarch Jacob, instead of taking him as some kind of moral beacon of light showing us that retaliation and lying are wrong, I want you to see everyone's motives in this story. So to set the scene, let's use a little context. If we go back to Genesis 33, we can see that Jacob is returning to Canaan after trying to reconcile with Esau, but he is settling here in Canaan with some purchased lands next to Shechem. And then in 34:1, we get the beginning of the events. The young daughter goes out to visit the other women of the city. But it says that Shechem seized her and took her by force. So this is clearly rape. And then it kind of does something weird. I'll just read it to you. So the prince of the land saw her, he seized her, and he lay with her and humiliated her. But it's also clear to tell us, and his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke with his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." We have good reason to believe contextually that she would have been rather young. And I wanted to point out the contrast of seizing her and taking her by force and humiliating her with longing for her and speaking tenderly to her and desiring her to be the wife, because this is the exact kind of excuses that we get whenever it's God's people doing this kind of thing. I'll talk about clear instances where God, through Moses, gives the command for the men to take the young virgins for themselves, captive brides, aka sex slaves. And the Christians just fill the comments with, "No, don't you understand? These men are dead." Yeah, because God ordered it. So these women need Men, you don't understand the society back then. Yeah, sure I do. Women had no value. Part of that was set up by the God of Israel. You are definitely dependent when you can't own property, when you're worth less than a man, and when your biggest commodity is your virginity. Like, they never zoom all the way out to understand how did we get to such a context and a culture that we would even have to try to make this excuse. But the excuses do come that, the men are dead, these women would starve to death or be raped by someone else, so better that God brings them into his people. Look, he's assimilating them. Isn't it beautiful? They even wait 30 days of mourning. It's not that, it's to make sure that the woman doesn't have a child that's not theirs. They're getting through a cycle. That's it. But just because there's some flowery language or the idea of marriage is associated with it, doesn't all of a sudden make up for a rape. And Christians can see that so clearly, I'm sure, when we talk about this verse. Why can't we have consistent standards for the God of the universe? But what do we know will most likely happen next in this culture, in this time, when a young girl has been raped? Will we care about the trauma of that young girl? Will we even hear her voice in the story? No. Will we move straight to negotiations between the men because their property has been devalued? Yes. So again, God is not active in this story, but the rules that he has set up are. Now again, those rules were for the Israelites, and they are now dealing with their foreign neighbors, who, guess what, seem to think just like them. Isn't that interesting? God says that he chose his chosen people and was going to set them apart, that by his high standard, we would be able to know them. But part of that standard is what happens when a woman is raped, and it's for the man who did it to marry her and compensate the father for his property loss. Doesn't seem to be so elevated and set apart when the horrific Canaanite neighbors are doing the exact same practices. Shechem and Hamor, by the way, are Hivites, just to be clear. But again, residing around the areas of Canaan and not part of the original chosen people. So Shechem, that did the rape, is telling his father, hey, you know what? I really liked her when I was humiliating her and taking her virginity, so I want her to be my wife, okay? Hamor is seeing dollar signs. This is a chance to co-align with Jacob. We see the selfish motivation a few times if you just read the text instead of the quick recap that this guy gives to make his agenda and point. You know what else having this kind of law does? It encourages, if you want to get closer ties to another family, if you do see a girl that you want to be your wife, just rape her. Force everybody's hand. But that God of perfect foresight apparently didn't see that one coming. But let's just read so you can hear again the motivations. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give you. Ask me for a great bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. So there's the negotiations. Hey, why don't we join forces? That'll be good for you. You can put your tents in the land more easily. It'll be good for us. It'll help with trade. Notice quickly what is not being spoken about. The hurt or the pain of this young woman. Why are they even having a conversation at all? Because Hamor knows that his son has devalued the property of another man. This is like if there had been an accident and someone accidentally killed the other's donkey. Hey, shit happens, but we'll make it right, because you can make it right in these societies under even the rules of the God of Israel. We just have to find the right price. It is completely about the economics of the issue. But the sons of Jacob do have some moral outrage here, even if it is incredibly selective considering all the things they've given their God a pass on. And so they decide to deal deceitfully, the text says, with these people. And they say, you know what? We could probably accept that, but our God would want you to be circumcised, and not just you and your son, but your entire people. Every male among you must be circumcised, the text says. So this holy covenant that shows that you belong to God is now used as a trap and trick. And you might think it's a tall order for these men who had nothing to do with the act or the repayment. Hamor knows that as well, and so he tells them, will not their livestock be ours? Again, it is about the economic gain for all of them by linking these two groups of people, these two families. And so they all agree. Now comes the massacre, the great master plan here from the sons of Jacob. On the third day, when they were sore, Simeon and Levi killed all the males. It's almost a funny vision, if it's not so horrific, watching or thinking about these men going tent to tent while these other men are incapacitated for the most part, killing them off so easily. Now, I've seen this event preached two different ways. I have seen this, wow, look how smart and cunning the Israelites are. After all, we've seen God work like this when there's smaller numbers of men versus larger numbers, and we've seen him blind them, deceive them with lying spirits, confuse them in the middle of the night. Trickery to win a battle is straight out of God's playbook. So the idea that it's bad is an inconsistent thought. But then you have kind of the more progressive Christian. And I think what this one is trying to say is, look, these guys are going outside. God didn't command this, because that's the thing. See, if God had commanded any of this, it would be okay. But since they're just following in God's footsteps without us getting to know that they heard directly from God to do so, now it's morally questionable. Now justice requires discernment all of a sudden. But hey, you're probably still rooting because remember, these brothers are just taking care of their young sister. In fact, the very end of the story is the brothers questioning back to their father saying, what, should we have just let her be treated like a prostitute? Because again, the issue isn't even rape. It's the rape of the wrong kind of girl, one who has worth, not because her inherent human dignity, as Christians would try to tell you, or because she is an heiress of grace, as Christians would try to tell you, but because she is young, she still has her virginity, and she can still make her father a prophet. Otherwise, might as well be a slave or a prostitute. But again, I think the video we watched today, this guy is trying to say that this was wrong, going after and killing all of these innocent men for the one crime of Shechem. And so my question to you as a believer, if you're watching this, if you agreed with that video that was shown, why do you not have this same standard for your God, who just in the book of Genesis alone has some of the biggest commands and imposed punishments of collective guilt from the Bible at large? I mean, right away, every single potential human being is cursed with death and sin because of what the first two people did. Every child before the age of accountability, if you believe in that, or just in general, that drowned in the flood was a victim of collective punishment. If you think the 2-year-old girl screaming who just watched her parents wash away as she takes her last breath before the waves crash over her face was not innocent, if you had to convince yourself of that in some way to still be on Team Yahweh, look how morally lost you are, especially if these other men of a Hivite nationality could be considered innocent and incorrectly grouped up and killed with collective punishment, which is what is trying to be alluded to here. That you'll see, but somehow that 2-year-old girl in the flood must have been, what, evil? This is all that I want. I just want consistency. Like, you can find fault almost anywhere until it's your God doing it, and then you just have to change your mind completely about what you supposedly consider to be just. You don't see a problem with that? I think that's why I wanted to cover this story, because it just so clearly shows, especially when a Christian is presenting the story in the way that they are, as some kind of, look how wrong the sons of Jacob were, that Jacob would be horrified and curse them. And that is as close as we get to God here. Jacob being disappointed with them. But you know what he doesn't cover? The reason Jacob is upset. He reads the verse, he adds in some language there that he's horrified, which we never get indication of. But let me read you in my Bible close, so let me find it. Let me read to you actually why Jacob is upset. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink on the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few. And if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." Again, to which they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" And that's the end of the story until we hear later that on his deathbed, he curses them, which plays itself out in the scattering of tribes. Oh, and also, I forgot to tell you what happened after the slaughter. It's all going to play together. So after they killed everyone, they took Dinah and they took her back. But then the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. What a convenient excuse. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth and their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. So is Jacob upset about the kidnapping of little children from their killed fathers while their mothers were also taken? I wonder what for. Even if you're one of the Christians that is condemning the sons of Jacob here, do you not understand that the only reason that Jacob is upset is because it could invite more retaliation? And where is his faith, by the way? What we see in little stories and glimpses like this is an antithesis to what most pastors, preachers, Bible study leaders, and apologists will try to portray from the Old Testament. It is about the patriarchs and their great faith. It is about trusting on God and seeing what he will do. Yes, they were human. Yes, they messed up. That's the point of the law. No one could actually be held up or unblemished against it. See how it points to Jesus. But what we actually see were people that did what they saw their God do or heard about their God do in the old stories. And the only moral wrong, when it is actually spelled out, is that it happened to the wrong person, the wrong tribe, the wrong group, that they weren't compensated enough, that they did it without the express permission of Yahweh. And we see this time and time again, and we see it in plenty of cases where it is commanded by God. So before you say, well, hey, they were acting on their own, I agree with you. They were acting on their own to do exactly the same things that God had commanded, condoned, and allowed elsewhere. So here's my question to you for the third time. If you were the kind of person that goes out of your way to make that excuse that God didn't command this and that Simeon and Levi were doing bad things, that these people didn't deserve it, that they shouldn't have plundered the women and children afterwards, then what do you say for the verses where it says, and God commanded, and God spoke to Moses saying X, and it's the same thing? Wrestle with that. Because the only answer I see is your hypocrisy. I see you knowing better because you are luckily not a part of ancient culture. You have the benefit of the evolved moral nature over time. You can say, I'm grading them back then for what we know now. Yes. So do all Christians, by the way, when you say that things are better now than they used to be, or that I wouldn't have wanted to live back then. You're right. Things are better, but not because God got better, but because despite this God and despite his Bible, people kept moving in a more moral trajectory. Not perfectly, not without hiccup, not to say there's nothing wrong going on now, but if you're a Christian who has a daughter and she's sexually assaulted, is your first instinct go make a bride price or go report it to the cops and seek some trauma counseling for your daughter? If it's this side, where are you getting that from? Not the love of God, not the law of God, the evolved morality that has happened since, and thank goodness. So if you can know better for yourself today, and you can see it clearly when we have an enemy doing these things in the text, in the story, but as soon as we get to it being from Yahweh's mouth, it's again murky to you. It's not. You're just being a hypocrite. Deal with that. Because there is an honest answer, and the honest answer is, you're right. It is hypocritical, or I should say a double standard, because I do have a different standard for God. God can do and command whatever he wants. Then why do you call it unjust today? Why would you call it immoral today. If you have an immutable God, and your God ever, even one time, commanded these kinds of things that you otherwise can see are so clearly wrong, then you have some real explaining you need to do about why they're wrong now. And if your answer is some measly, well, Jesus came and died for our sin, that doesn't remove that Jesus also said to uphold the law and expected that everyone carry out every letter of the law, or that he was there at creation giving that law, that he's part of the reason it's written on your heart, or that God, multiple times in the Old Testament, who is claimed to be immutable himself, said his law will never change, that it is always good. You can't just say the word Jesus and act like it's a magic spell. You have to actually try to explain, despite everything I just covered, why you get to be selective about the horrendous immorality of the character of Yahweh as shown through his prescriptive commands and doings. What am I missing? Why do Christians talk about this story, pretend that they agree that this is wrong, when seconds later they're going to read a different verse where God does it and they won't call it wrong? The argument is, why a perfect God outside of time, ever, even one time, allowed this to happen, because he didn't speak up here. This God who we know every little pet peeve of, this God who kills men for picking up sticks, stays quiet during the rape and subsequent massacre. When you have that much voice elsewhere, silence is condoning. But I don't even have to make that point, because we see this God do it himself elsewhere. This is another one of those weird Old Testament stories. And you know what? Kudos to this guy for trying to find a way to preach it. But let's apply some of that context and let's try to be a bit more consistent. Let's not leave out the parts that make the story sound a different way to make your point about justice or God's love. God is absent here in this story like he is absent for the rape of so many young girls. So if you believe he cares about all the sexual assault, all the child trafficking, all the Epstein stuff, whatever you want to talk about, if you think he cares, if you're praying for him to heal the heart of someone who's been hurt, remember that when he knew that hurt would happen, his best laid out detailed plan was to make sure the dad got enough money. That is your God. I want to specially call out Gnarlywill, someone who has made the biggest pledge that you can, that I have unfortunately left off of this list for too long now. But also, of course, those who have been supporting for a long time: Ann, Boris, Chris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn. Then our humanist heroes: Chris, Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi. Our atheist advocates: Aquitar, Caleb, Dakota, Dan, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Jeremy, Jugs, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas. As well as all of my secular scholar patrons.